Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, August 18th, 2026, episode 576, and we're going to talk about Korea. A little history of Korea, just to give some context. Um, Basically, just like Japan, Korea was called a hermit kingdom. They didn't let anyone come into the country. They were extreme isolationists, which is why I know that to be anti-war is not to be isolationist, because Korea was isolationist. And what they would do is they would murder anyone, any foreigner who would land intentionally or unintentionally on the beaches of Korea, on the coast of Korea. Well, that isolationism ended in 1876 with the Treaty of Ganghwa, uh, and forced on it by the West and by Japan. And just to give you an idea of, this isolationism, in 1791 and 1801, missionaries were murdered and they were Catholic missionaries. They were murdered because they were teaching that ancestor worship is wrong, like they shouldn't do it. And you got to know, ancestor worship in Korea is, well, it used to be, I don't know about now, is like it's up there in terms of important practices. My grandfather decided that he was no longer going to do ancestor worship with once he became a Christian, and that would have been in the 1920s, I believe, 20s or 30s, and it was a big controversy. People literally were coming after him to take his life because not failure to worship one's ancestors would bring lots of curses and hardship to your family. And the responsibility for taking care of the ancestors fell on the first son of the first son of the first son. And so basically, that was my grandfather. And so he was supposed to continue with the ancestor worship, but he walked away. He gave the uh, Jokbo, the family tree, which is this huge, thick book, basically, which has the family tree. And you had to, and later, more recently, at least when in the 90s, um, you didn't have to worship all of the ancestors, but just up to 10 generations, which is still a lot, believe me. And that involves taking care of their graves, um, making sacrifices on the new year, etc. So that happened in 1791 and 1801. Missionaries uh, were murdered. And then 1839 and 1866, French missionaries were murdered. 1866 apparently being a really horrible affair. And then Korea was annexed by Japan in 1910. And from what I've read, Japan started meddling and interfering with Korea's government in the late 1800s. And so once Japan annexed Korea, it was the end of Korea at the time called Joseon. So the Joseon dynasty came to an end and began a Japanese rule in Korea. And I mentioned this before, but they basically tried to make all Koreans Japanese. So you weren't allowed to speak Korean, you weren't allowed to learn Korean, but everyone did anyway. You had to have a Japanese name. School was conducted in Japanese, et cetera, et cetera. So my dad, he could speak Japanese fluently. He had a Japanese name. He never told me what it was. Um, but all of that, and with the imposition of Japanese culture was also Japanese religion. So that's why Christians were heavily persecuted in those days. And my grandfather and my father as well, persecuted for their faith. In other words, you didn't get persecuted if you sold out, if you collaborated with the Japanese, you incorporated Japanese religion into your church, then you didn't get persecuted. But of course, my grandfather and father took a stand, and they weren't imprisoned because my father was just a child and my grandfather was just an elder. He wasn't a pastor, so he wasn't sent to prison, but he was regularly tortured down at the police station, publicly humiliated and whatnot. And my dad, following his example, would regularly get beat at school, wasn't allowed to go to school, junior high, etc. And I've talked about this before. Then 1945 comes along. Japan loses the war, so they leave. Japanese influence uh, ends in Korea, but I think because of Yalta, Korea is divided into two between the then Soviet Union and the United States. And so the Soviet Union controlled the North, and the South was controlled by the UN, really the United States. Then in 1950 to 53 was a Korean War, but people call it a police action, conflict, etc. Um, and the country was completely leveled. It was bombed out. There was like nothing there. My dad would tell me stories of how everything was flat. Um, but then through the 60s and 70s, we saw a lot of rapid growth to the point where in the 80s, you started seeing Korean cars being sold in the United States. And now there's a lot of uh, wealth, bubble wealth, maybe in South Korea. A lot of people watching Korean dramas and enjoying K-pop and things like that, things which I could never even imagine when I was a kid. But anyway, uh, so then after the Korean War, North and South, they never signed a peace treaty. So technically, they're still at war, which is why there is a demilitarized zone, not a border, but a demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. Uh, but as we go forward, the South is becoming more influenced by the politics of the North. In other words, the South is becoming ever more communist, and the North is just, well, they're still communist, right? Um, if there is any change, it's that Kim Jong-un is met with Trump a couple times to the point where Trump made a Truth Social post recently, and that's what we're going to talk about. And the reason why today's episode is on Korea. So the North and South have been trying to normalize relations, oh, for 30, 40 years, probably since the end of World War II. Um, there are lots of refugees coming out of North Korea, and the way they have to get to South Korea is they have to go north into China, then travel all the way down to Vietnam, and then from Vietnam, then try to catch a plane into Korea. At least that's what was explained to me back in the 90s. They probably streamlined that a lot more, but there are a tremendous amount of refugees. I'm it's likely that a lot of the people coming to the South in that through that route are probably sleepers, people sent by the government to of North Korea to try to figure out what's going on in the South. Then the North got a nuke, uh, and also there are rumors that they don't have good relations with Russia or China. They used to be intimately tied with the Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, so did South Korea. There was mass starvation. It was pretty bad. But I guess they're recovering and they're engaged in a little bit of trade with Russia and China. I've even heard stories of rumors of kidnappings, like North Koreans would come and kidnap South Koreans or even Japanese. I don't know why, but those were the stories. Full disclosure, as you probably already guessed, I am Korean or of Korean descent, born in America. My mom is from from North Korea, and my dad is from South Korea. My mom, as soon as the communists took over North Korea, her family basically walked south, right? And if you've ever walked in Korea, you know there are no straight lines. There are no flat areas in Korea. It's all mountains. And I think, let's see, my mom was like 14 years old and she had to walk south, carried one of her siblings on her back just to get to South Korea. And eventually met my dad let's see, when did he, in 59, 1959. Anyway, so that's why I was born in the US. My dad came to study here in the United States in 1959. And so that's when I was born. So that's why I was born in the 60s here in the United States. And also why I studied race theory in grad school since, I had a hard time trying to understand all this it's a lot worse now, but all of the race talk, race baiting, race theory that people kept shoving into my face. And so I had to try to figure out what all of that meant. Enter the Trump Truth Social post, okay? And I'm going to read it for you here. Based on my very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, I am not happy with the fact that the United States has, long ago, agreed to participate in joint military exercises with South Korea. These exercises are not only costly, with much of the costs paid for by the United States of America, as usual, but send a signal that is totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful. Therefore, and based on the fact uh, that it is too late to cancel, I have instructed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to substantially reduce the joint military exercises. While somewhat unrelated, I recently asked the president of South Korea if they would like to join us in the denuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they said, no thanks. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So I saw the True Social post and I saw some people talking about it. And I did a little bit of, a Google search, and France 24 English said that the exercises took place anyway. In other words, the True Social post was made the day before they were set to begin. And, it wasn't going to change things. It was too late to change anything. So what was the point of the post? Probably Trump did it because he was upset that South Korea would not, quote unquote, help him with Iran. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But that's Trump. So he didn't get what he wants. So he throws a tantrum and he makes this interesting post. Um, he probably wanted to sort of threaten South Korea, or maybe try to embarrass South Korea. But the result should be that it pushes South Korea to move closer with China and maybe Russia. So, in other words, the intent was to get Korea to support America more. And because of Trump's posts and the things that he says and his policy, the result will probably be that South Korea is pushed closer to China, the opposite, and further away from the United States. So the opposite result from the intent, which is usually what happens, right? The consequences of actions, particularly government action, because it's coercive and hypocritical, will be the opposite of the intent, right? So the consequences or the results will be the opposite of what they say they were trying to do. And this pushing Korea closer to North Korea or to China. That has already always been an underlying current in the society, but Trump is just getting more people to be more certain that this is the right way to go. Now, it reminds me of a quote from Henry Kissinger, um, where he said, "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal, is deadly." And so let's just think about this for a second. When it comes to being an enemy of the United States will then try to get regime change in your country. That's if you're an enemy. And whether they're successful or not, usually they are not. And I rate success as long term, where a lot of the people are then on board and they're happy with this new American puppet government. But they never are, because America always sets up a puppet government so they can plunder that country. At least that's what they do for the enemies. What about their allies? A lot of shady behavior. You may remember the Nord Stream pipeline, a way for Germany and Europe to get cheap liquid LPG, liquid LNG, liquid, anyway, natural gas. Um, they blew that pipeline up so that they couldn't get cheap gas from Russia. And instead, the United States wanted Europe to buy their much more expensive American natural gas. And they're just supposed to sit there and take it. I don't know. It's sort of like going up to one of us and say, "Oh, no, no, you can't buy that $1 pretzel from my enemy. You're going to have to buy this $5 pretzel for me." It's a lot smaller, tastes exactly the same, but it's a lot smaller and a lot more expensive. And you're going to be happy, right? Because Russia's bad. That's the logic that seems to be thrown around a lot today. Then you might remember um, America was busted for spying on Germany's prime minister or chancellor, Angela Merkel. And apparently they were doing it since 2002. And it wasn't until 2013 that people and the Germans themselves became aware of it. And that's because Edward Snowden blew the whistle on that. That's why he's exiled from this country. Um, then uh, America tries to get Europe to basically go all in against Russia in this Ukraine war. And how is this beneficial to Europe? It's not. It doesn't benefit the everyday person at all to look at death and destruction for something which really is not even necessary. Then you got Venezuela, who's a puppet government right now, and the United States is plundering that country. How does that benefit Venezuela? It does not. Um, Allies, quote unquote, allies, are forced indirectly to buy American weapons, which don't even work now we know now they don't work. They don't work as advertised. And in Korea's case, at the after the Ukraine war started, America uh, pillaged all of its 155 millimeter ammunition stores, right? Like we need them in Ukraine. And these were weapons that were bought from the United States. So Korea spent the money to buy them only to have the United States take them. So how are they supposed to defend against North Korea? Well, maybe it's not necessary. And if it's not necessary, then why are we still having this DMZ between the two countries? Then more recently, the THAAD missile defense battery, that's like $1 billion, was also taken back. I don't know if they were refunded for buying it, but they were also taken out of South Korea. And now this, right? Where the joint exercises are, you know, they should no longer be had. It's a threat, a goofy threat, but nevertheless, add it to the pile. And on top of it, I mean, right? So to be America's friend, what about to be American? Our own government spies on us, taxes us, a heavy tax burden. And this whole idea of property tax is gaining traction. I hope it becomes a revolution, right? You buy your house, you own your house, but you can lose your house because you have to keep paying taxes every year on it, which is really goofy. Then they hit us with the inflation tax. They lose track of billions of dollars. Uh, the Pentagon fails attempts at audits, but they want to track your $600, right? I think they don't have time to do that, but yet that's what they want to do. And then more recently, you got the flock cameras and all the government agencies ruining our lives, making our life more difficult, more restrictive, more expensive. Even yesterday I made a post that there was a rumor or excuse me, a preliminary study that ivermectin, along with another drug, seemed to have some positive potential fighting cancer. And I kind of posted that, and someone replied, a former student of mine, she said that, you know, that's fine, but, no one ever said that ivermectin is uh, useful against the cervasis. And I was like, wow, really? We're still holding on to that. So there are people who, and the reason why all this happens is because there are people who allow it, who are willing to go along with it because they believe hook, line, and sinker all of the government propaganda regarding any of these agencies, regarding the spying, surveillance, overreach. Now, whatever the reason, and I'm not really going to go into it in this episode, but whatever the reason behind this unsavory behavior of our government towards our enemies, towards allies, and to its own people, whatever the reason, let's look at the results. So, what do we get for all of this um, meddling that the United States engages in? Well, we have a $40 trillion debt. And as everyone probably knows by now, that's only the running budget debt. But if we include the unfunded liabilities, we're looking at close to or well over $200 trillion. Yeah, that's not ever going to be repaid. There's animosity all over the world against Americans. There's a decline in trust for America. Um, and because of the racialization, I talked about this a few episodes ago, but because of the way race works, because Trump is perceived a certain way, well, that feeling is passed on to everyone who lives in the United States until someone meets them. But until that happens, everyone is just like Trump. Uh, and so I even saw, like my one of my kids was in Europe, and he was surprised that sometimes they were really poorly treated by the people who were working at either the airport or the hotels. And we wondered if this isn't sort of the result of current U.S. Foreign policy and the personalities in the government right now. So, looking ahead to the future, when the US starts getting into trouble economically, will there be any goodwill left in the world for America and Americans? And unfortunately, because of all of this nuttiness, this bad behavior on the part of the government, more and more people in the United States is moving towards democratic socialism. It's kind of unbelievable how much people like democratic socialism. I saw a statistic, a survey that either close to or around half of all Democrats have a favorable view of socialism, and only less than 20% have a negative view. And that's just with the Democrats, and that's ever increasing in spite of all of the horrible outcomes of socialism, like the United States right now. People want more of it. It's kind of, which makes me always say it's democratic socialism or socialism as a whole is the sort of lazy way of trying to solve the problems by passing responsibility on to other people. You can only do that for so long and then everything falls apart. Now, Ron Paul always says that there's a remnant or a small group of people who would continue to fight and preserve and try to spread the message of freedom, because they have a better understanding, they have more knowledge. Uh, that remnant will try to preserve that knowledge, try to live and stay free, and try to spread the message of freedom. And so that's what we got to do. We have to have a clear understanding of our government, how things are going, how it treats other people. Right now, with Russia and Iran, America is just the aging bully, getting too old to fight and getting very, very embarrassed and humiliated in the process. And so they start lashing out at even supposed allies. And this is sort of, to me, sure signs that the country is in major decline. And given that and our small number, we have to maintain hope that eventually all of this falls apart and people will start looking for real answers and make the effort to learn and understand the value and the potential in the idea and the life of freedom. That's it for today. I'll talk to you guys next time.